My next book concerns Martin Heidegger, the 20th century philosopher. He'd written this book called Memorial Address, which was in fact a public talk. That's what an address is, that he gave in his hometown. So a casual affair for ordinary people, but quite thoughtful. Nevertheless, quite thoughtful because of that. Heidegger was a 20th century philosopher. You can see by his dates that we've come much closer to our own world. He ends the reading today talking about the meaning of atomic power. So we recognize that as really our era, whereas Locke, Rousseau, Descartes were clearly moderns, but thinkers of the past. Heidegger shares with us the one main fact about modern life, living under technology so powerful that it changes the conditions of life. Now, Heidegger seemed to be born to be a philosopher. He was driven to explore certain ideas, and in his academic career, found ways to express, sort of in a professional and academic way, more or less, the thoughts that obsessed him just as a human being. He was something like Einstein that way. Einstein seemed to be almost born thinking about time and speed and distance and the basic things of physics and mechanics, and that natural obsession he turned into academic output, which changed the way everybody thinks about the world. And Heidegger was similar. He had even a similar influence with Einstein. That there are many modern scholars who are simply following in the wake of Heidegger, who are carrying on with the inquiries that he opened up, especially people who think about the arts and politics and the arts. The most exciting modern thinkers are often students of students, 2 or 3 generations away from Heidegger. Even now he's generating a lot of heat. He is clearly a strong thinker, an arresting, captivating thinker. He's not particularly a safe thinker. You can see by his dates that he lived through the Nazi era. He was a German. He was very tightly associated with the Nazi Party, and it helped him in his early career. And this perplexes scholars. The books seem instructive on their own, but the man himself was perhaps evil, perhaps a fool. We don't know quite what mix put that on, to how to explain that. And I think we shouldn't try to explain it or go into depth of it. We now have a book that we haven't yet understood. And it isn't hiding anything. It's giving its ideas right out front. We may agree, we may disagree. And it seems to be a good position to take on a new thinker and to recognize his quality without too easily giving ourselves over to his authority and trusting what he says. In today's reading, there are a couple ideas that we will emphasize and for you to think about. I've jumped ahead to page 47 at the bottom, and we have this important quote from a German poet, Johann Peter Hebel. We are plants which, whether we admit it to ourselves as not, must with our roots rise out of the earth in order to bloom in the ether and to bear fruit. So there's a metaphor. It has to do with 2 things: the ground we stand on and live in, and the products of our mind. So to bloom, to make a beautiful flower, to bear fruit, to have some good thing come, as a result of perhaps the music we compose. That would be the context. He's giving a talk about a famous composer. Or simply our thoughts, the products of our mind, our understanding. If those are beautiful and fruitful, then according to Heidegger, he uses this quote approvingly, according to Heidegger in this quote, that happens because the plant goes in the other direction. It first puts down roots in the soil and then sends up a bloom in the opposite direction, and the two for Heidegger are connected. Now, here Heidegger identifies himself as taking a completely new position with regard to Descartes. Descartes is a natural opponent on this matter. Descartes thought something quite the opposite. You will remember Descartes wanted to get rid of all old ideas because they were tainted and badly formed and confusing and corrupt. He wanted to get rid of all old ideas. He wanted to withdraw from history and start again with something new. So if Descartes rather had used this metaphor, he would have somehow had to say, cut off the roots and let the flower bloom on its own in the air. That may not be possible, but then perhaps that's why Descartes didn't use this metaphor and Heidegger did. What I want to emphasize is that we just have a fundamental difference of opinion. Descartes takes the scientific way and the modern way, that since history is in error, since it's confused, nothing really productive or effective can grow out of it. Because of what puts its roots down into history will be part of that history, and therefore tangled and confused. If human beings want to ever do anything good, they have to cut themselves free and start from basic beginnings that they themselves can understand. And therefore there can be knowledge, therefore you can know what you're doing. You can make good choices, and you can produce something productive. That's Descartes' point of view. And Heidegger is trying to argue for the opposite. It's only from going down into your history and being nourished by it that anything good is ever produced. And that the beautiful flower, which may be the thing that gets our attention, it can't be a flower except for the stem and the ugly roots. So that's just a basic decision that each of us have to make. Which of those ideas is a more powerful one? Which is a more productive way to live? The other main theme of this first reading is thinking, and then the flight from thinking, which is to say we're running away, we're ignoring, we're destroying our capacity to think. This is Heidegger's view of the modern world. And this, of course, is a kind of paradox. There seems to be no one more brainy than we moderns. There's never been a generation with as much knowledge, and never been people who are so busy trying to get knowledge and use knowledge as we moderns. And yet Heidegger says what is really distinctive about us is that we are in flight from thinking. We're not thinking at all. We're giving up on it. This leads to a basic distinction that he makes between kinds of thinking, between the calculative, which is his view of the modern way, that is very busy with knowledge but not really thinking, and then meditative thinking, which is of a higher order and is of a different kind. Now these two themes are linked in that Heidegger feels that true meditative thinking is a way to put down roots, and therefore to make it possible for yourself to grow into a flower and then bloom, which is to say to somehow make something of life, to be at least alert to the life you're living while you're living it. So those are two things I haven't attempted to explain fully, but two themes for the class. The metaphor of the flower and the importance of being rooted in a certain place, rather than taking Descartes' advice and cutting yourself off from your roots and starting again as a kind of natural or universal human being. And then the problem of thinking. That although we think and think and think in the modern world and use our brains and tire ourselves out, that this is a kind of neglect of a more profound kind of thinking. And now one thing I will recommend to you, and it will illustrate some of these themes and I hope bring some of this thought together, is here the paragraph in the middle of page 48. And I think I won't take time to try to explain it to you. I think you can understand it on your own. But I'd be interested to hear people's reactions. Pay careful attention to this paragraph in the middle of page 48 when you get to it in the reading. And ask yourself how does it relate to your experience? Can you see that although you are not German and you are living in not at Heidegger's time, but in another century, can you say that this speaks to your experience, that this is a familiar description for the world around you? Or rather, do you reject these concerns and side more with Descartes and his attempts to make himself not a particular person from a particular place, but more a universal human being? Deliberately through the reading, here we are on the first page, page 43 of the book where I borrowed this text from. This is the text of a talk on an ordinary occasion in a small town in Germany. They were having a celebration to honor a composer who had been dead for a century or so. It was his 175th birthday. The mayor wanted to have some kind of occasion to mark this event. He knew that Heidegger, one of the most famous academics of the time, had written a paper on this composer and invited Heidegger to take part. And there we have it, a common event in a small town. Heidegger begins not in a scientific or academic way, but rather as a human being. He begins with words of gratitude about the place, as particularly his hometown. He is then at home, and he's not thinking first of doing something professional or adding to the world's research, adding to our store of knowledge about this famous composer. What he wants to do first is to do a moral thing, to say thank you to the people who share his town.